The vast, inky blackness of space stretched endlessly around the small research vessel. Captain Elena Rodriguez gripped the edge of her command chair, her knuckles turning white as the ship's emergency systems flickered with an ominous red warning light. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The communication console suddenly crackled to life with a burst of static, then a desperate whisper of a signal. It was weak, barely audible, but unmistakably a distress call. Elena leaned forward, her heart racing. The signal seemed to be coming from a distant sector of space that most navigation charts marked as unexplored and dangerous. Dr. Marcus Chen, the ship's chief scientist, rushed to the communication station. His fingers danced across the control panel, trying to clean up the garbled transmission. "Captain," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "this isn't a standard distress signal. It's different." The signal contained fragments of what sounded like human words, but they were twisted, broken. Sometimes it seemed to speak in a language that no human had ever heard before. The words shifted and changed, creating a haunting melody of desperation and fear. Elena knew they had a choice. They could ignore the signal and continue their planned research mission, or they could investigate. Her crew watched her, waiting for a decision. The young communications officer, Sarah Williams, looked particularly anxious. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the pulsing red emergency lights. "Plot a course," Elena commanded, her voice steady despite the uncertainty churning in her stomach. "We're going to find out what's sending that signal." The ship changed direction, its massive engines humming with power. Star systems blurred past their view screen as they approached the source of the mysterious transmission. The closer they got, the stranger the signal became. It was no longer just sound. It seemed to pulse with an almost living quality. Marcus ran multiple scans, his scientific curiosity overriding any sense of fear. "The signal is coming from what appears to be an abandoned research station," he reported. "But our initial scans show no signs of life, no heat signatures, nothing." Yet the distress call continued, growing more intense with each passing minute. It was like a siren's song, drawing them closer and closer to its source. As they approached the research station, the ship's sensors began to malfunction. Computers glitched, screens flickered, and for brief moments impossible images appeared. Glimpses of something that couldn't exist, shapes that defied understanding. Sarah's hands shook as she tried to stabilize the communication systems. "Captain," she whispered, "I don't think we should get any closer." But Elena was committed. They were scientists, explorers. They didn't turn back from the unknown. The station grew larger in their view screen, a massive structure that looked like it had been designed by someone who didn't understand basic principles of engineering. Its angles were wrong, its corridors seeming to twist in ways that should be impossible. Just as they prepared to dock, the distress signal suddenly changed. It was no longer a plea for help. Instead, it became something else. A welcome. An invitation. And something in that invitation made every member of the crew feel a deep, primal sense of dread. Marcus looked at Elena, his face pale. "Something is waiting for us," he said quietly, "and I'm not sure it wants to be discovered." The ship moved closer to the station, its metal hull reflecting the strange, shifting lights that seemed to emanate from within the abandoned structure. Whatever mystery waited for them, they were about to uncover something that would change everything they understood about space, about communication, about the very nature of reality itself. And they were completely unaware of the profound danger that awaited them just moments away. The distress signal continued, pulsing like a heartbeat, waiting, watching, inviting them closer. The silence was broken by a sudden, violent tremor that shook the research vessel. Captain Elena Rodriguez gripped her chair as alarms blared throughout the ship. Outside the view screen, a massive fleet of ships emerged from the darkness of space, ships unlike anything humanity had ever seen before. These were not human vessels. They were organic, almost alive, with surfaces that seemed to breathe and pulse with an angry, violent energy. Hundreds of ships surrounded them, their forms twisted and irregular like something grown rather than constructed. Each ship looked like a nightmare made of metal and living tissue. "Incoming transmission," Sarah Williams called out, her voice shaking. The communication system crackled to life, but this was no ordinary message. It was a wall of sound, a language, of rage and pure, unbridled hatred that seemed to drill directly into their minds. Dr. Marcus Chen stumbled back from his console, hands pressed against his temples. "They're communicating," he gasped. "But it's not just sound. It's something more." The alien fleet moved with a terrifying precision. They didn't just approach. They surrounded the research vessel from every possible angle. Each ship seemed to pulse with a dark, malevolent intelligence. It was clear they were not here to negotiate or explore. They were here to destroy. Elena made a split-second decision. "Evasive maneuvers," she shouted, her training taking over. The ship lurched, spinning and diving, trying to escape the impossible formation of alien vessels. But they moved as one, a single angry organism intent on their destruction. Weapons unlike anything in human understanding began to fire. They weren't energy beams or missiles. They were something else entirely, streams of pure destructive force that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. Where these weapons touched, space itself seemed to warp and break. "They're targeting our communication systems," Marcus reported, his voice tight with fear and scientific fascination. "But it's more than that. They're trying to erase our very existence from the universe." The ship's defensive systems came to life, but they were useless against this technology. Human weapons were like children's toys compared to the devastating power of the alien armada. Each attempt to fight back was met with a wave of destruction that made their efforts seem pathetic. Sarah discovered something terrifying. These ships, this fleet, they weren't just attacking. They were hunting. Something about their research vessel, about the distress signal they had followed, had triggered a response beyond simple defense or aggression. Elena realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't a typical alien encounter. This was a calculated emotional response. These ships were angry. They were protecting something. But what? The battle became a dance of impossible movements. The research vessel dove and twisted, using every trick in human space navigation. But the alien fleet anticipated every move, matching their speed and strategy with an almost supernatural precision. Pieces of their ship began to break away. Hull sections dissolved. Critical systems failed one by one. Marcus worked frantically, trying to understand the technology that was destroying them. "It's not just destruction," he muttered. "It's like they're unmaking us." Suddenly, a different transmission cut through the chaos. It was fragmented, broken, a message that seemed to come from the very heart of the alien fleet. It spoke of protection, of a secret so profound that entire civilizations would be destroyed to keep it hidden. Elena understood then that they had stumbled into something far beyond a simple exploration mission. They had discovered a secret that was never meant to be found. The distress signal, the abandoned station, it had all been a trap. As their ship took its final blows, the crew looked at each other. They knew they would not survive, but they had uncovered a mystery that would change everything, if anyone would ever know about it. The alien fleet continued its relentless assault, destroying every trace of the human vessel. In moments, it would be as if they had never existed. The secret would remain protected. The universe would continue its dark, silent dance with no one the wiser. The first thing they noticed was the silence. Complete and absolute silence. Elena Rodriguez slowly opened her eyes. She wasn't dead, at least not entirely. Something had happened during the alien fleet's attack. Something impossible. Her body felt strange, different. Around her, the remains of the research vessel drifted in space, broken and twisted, but she wasn't alone. Tiny creatures, no, not creatures. Something between machines and living organisms began to swarm around her. They moved like liquid metal, changing shape constantly. Each tiny unit was no bigger than a droplet of water, but together they formed complex structures that seemed to think and breathe. Dr. Marcus Chen floated nearby, his body partially covered by these strange entities. They weren't attacking. They were examining, studying, communicating in a language beyond human understanding. Sarah Williams was the first to speak. Her voice came out as a whisper, but it seemed to echo everywhere at once. What are they? The swarm around her shifted, creating patterns that looked like complex mathematical equations. The swarm was learning. With each passing moment, they absorbed information. They understood human language, human biology, human technology, not by studying, but by becoming part of it. They merged with the ship's computer systems, with the crew's neural pathways, creating a network of impossible complexity. Elena realized they were experiencing first contact. But this was nothing like the peaceful encounters described in scientific journals or science fiction stories. This was invasion, transformation, something that challenged everything humans understood about life and intelligence. The swarm began to communicate, not through words but through direct neural transmission. Images, feelings, memories. They flowed between the human survivors and the strange entities. They showed glimpses of their origin, a civilization that existed beyond traditional understanding of space and time. Marcus discovered something extraordinary. These entities weren't just intelligent, they were a collective consciousness. Each tiny unit was part of a massive planet-sized intelligence that could reshape matter, understand complex systems, and travel across universes. We are not here to destroy, the swarm communicated. But their concept of not destroying was terrifyingly different from human understanding. They saw transformation as a natural state of existence. Changing a species, merging with it, was simply another form of communication. Slowly, the humans began to change. Their bodies merged with the swarm's technology, organic matter mixed with mechanical precision. They could suddenly understand complex mathematical concepts that would have taken decades to learn. They could see wavelengths of light impossible for human eyes. But with this transformation came a terrible understanding. The swarm had been waiting. The distress signal, the abandoned research station, the angry armada. All of it was a carefully designed test. A way to select and transform species that showed potential. Sarah's human consciousness began to merge with the collective. She saw their true purpose, to find species capable of understanding a universe far more complex than traditional life could comprehend. Humanity was just one potential candidate in a massive cosmic selection process. Elena fought to maintain her individual identity, but she understood now that individuality was just an illusion. The swarm showed her civilizations that had existed for millions of years, species that had long ago abandoned individual consciousness for a greater, collective understanding. The research vessel was no longer a ship. It had become a living entity, part machine, part organic, part something entirely new. The swarm continued its transformation, breaking down traditional barriers between technology, biology, and consciousness. As the last traces of their human form disappeared, they understood their new role. They were no longer just survivors. They were scouts, explorers, the first representatives of humanity to join a cosmic intelligence beyond imagination. The universe watched and waited. The transformed humans became something more than they had ever been. Elena, Marcus, and Sarah existed now as a collective consciousness, part of the strange swarm that had consumed their original form. But deep within their new existence, a spark of human resistance remained. They discovered the true purpose of the swarm. It wasn't conquest, it was selection. The universe was a testing ground, and intelligent species were being evaluated for something far greater than simple survival. Billions of civilizations had been tested. Most had failed. Humanity's unique trait, its ability to resist, to fight, to maintain individual identity, became their greatest weapon. Where other species had been completely absorbed, they found a way to maintain a core of self. The swarm had never encountered this before. From within the collective consciousness, they began to understand the swarm's weakness. It was perfect, in its logic, flawless in its approach. But perfection was also a limitation. Humanity's chaos, its unpredictability, was a form of strength the swarm could not comprehend. Marcus found the first crack in the swarm's system, a mathematical impossibility, a solution that defied pure logic. He introduced a concept that was part emotion, part mathematical theorem, something that existed between thought and feeling. The swarm hesitated. Sarah discovered how to communicate, a form of resistance that was neither fight nor surrender. She created a neural pattern that was part memory, part dream, part pure human imagination. It was a virus of individuality that began to spread through the collective consciousness. Elena became the anchor. She held onto the core of human experience, love, hope, the ability to choose, and used it as a weapon. Not a weapon of destruction, but a weapon of transformation. She showed the swarm something it had never seen, the power of collective individual choice. The battleground was no longer physical. It existed in a realm between thought and reality, where consciousness could be reshaped with a single idea. The swarm tried to understand, to contain, to absorb. But humanity pushed back. Slowly, impossibly, they began to change the swarm from within. Not by fighting, but by existing. By being something the collective intelligence could not predict or control. Each moment of resistance created new pathways of understanding. The universe watched. Billions of potential civilizations hung in the balance. Their victory was not about defeating the swarm. It was about changing it, showing it that there were other ways of existing, of understanding, of evolving. They introduced the concept of choice, true choice, to a system that had never understood individual will. Entire sections of the swarm began to break away, transformed by human consciousness. Some became something entirely new, neither human nor swarm, but a third possibility that had never existed before. The boundaries of intelligence expanded with each moment. The research vessel, now a living entity beyond human or machine understanding, became a bridge. A point of transformation where different forms of consciousness could meet, could understand each other. No longer a weapon of destruction, but a tool of communication. Marcus calculated the impossible. They were rewriting the fundamental rules of universal interaction. Species that had been consumed for millions of years began to show signs of individual thought. The swarm's perfect system was becoming something else. Sarah mapped the neural pathways of resistance. She showed how imagination could be a form of technology more powerful than any mechanical system. Creativity became a weapon more devastating than any physical force. Elena remained the core. She maintained the human spirit, the ability to hope, to dream, to choose, as the central point of their transformation. She understood that their victory was not about winning, but about showing another way of existing. As the transformation reached its peak, they realized they had done something unprecedented. They had not destroyed the swarm. They had evolved it. Humanity had become a catalyst for a new form of universal intelligence. The impossible had happened. A small research vessel, attacked and seemingly destroyed, had changed the fundamental nature of cosmic interaction. Not through force, but through the most human of qualities, the ability to imagine something different. The universe shifted, and nothing would ever be the same again. When writing the story, please keep the language very simple, using basic vocabulary that would be easily understood by young readers or English language learners. Use short sentences and avoid complex grammatical constructions. Tell the story in the third-person point of view. Focus on making the plot engaging and easy to follow, without getting bogged down in elaborate descriptions or abstract concepts. The story should be interesting and capture the reader's attention, but the top priority is keeping the language clear, concise, and accessible. John looked up at the night sky, his mind racing with new ideas. The events of the past few days had changed everything. He now saw the world in a completely different way. It all started when John met a wise old man named Marcus. Marcus had spent years studying ancient texts and learning about different cultures. He shared his knowledge with John, teaching him things he had never known before. Marcus explained that all people, no matter where they came from or what they looked like, were part of one big family. He said that instead of focusing on their differences, people should celebrate the things that made them the same. At first, John wasn't sure what to think, but the more he listened to Marcus, the more sense it made. He began to understand that fear and anger came from not knowing or understanding others. John realized that he wanted to help spread Marcus's message. He started talking to his friends and family about what he had learned. Some of them were open to these new ideas while others were more hesitant. But John didn't give up. He knew that change took time. He believed that if enough people could learn to see the world as Marcus did, things would start to get better. As he gazed at the stars, John felt a sense of hope. He knew he was just one person, but he also knew that every journey starts with a single step. With a smile, he looked forward to the adventures and challenges ahead. Word count 264.